Yeah, should be
All
good.
right, cool. All right, welcome everybody to Misinformation, Disinformation, and Conspiracy Theories as a Threat to Public Health. My name is Eddie, and I'm the Program Director for the ASIS Student Chapter here at SJSU, although I am not actually at SJSU right now. I'm in Southern California. Uh, Before we officially get started with our wonderful guest, I want to invite you all to check out our website. There's going to be a link in the chat. And if you like these kinds of events, consider following us on our social media and subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date with all the events happening. All right, so our special guest today is Evan Thornburg. And Evan is currently serves as the Health Equity Officer for the Philadelphia Department of Public Health in the Division of HIV Health. Evan is an expert in intersectionality in systems of healthcare and public health, specializing in policy, legislation, equity-based program development, and comprehensive training on health equity, health disparities, social determinants of health, and the inclusion of vulnerable populations in system level redesign. Evan, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to the iSchool at SJSU. How are you doing today?
I am doing good. I'm the day is over, which is nice. So I get to kick back and chit chat with you, which is, it easy into the day.
Nice, nice. Well, thank you so much for being here. And you're in Philadelphia, right? Is that right?
I am in Philadelphia. Born and raised, I won't get into the whole song, but from the Fresh Prince.
Yeah. Are you still happy about the Super Bowl win there?
Oh, everybody is. Absolutely. I'm still wearing Eagles gear. It's
Yeah.
funny you say that because I almost wore an Eagles sweater for this and I was like too much.
Oh,
Too much,
yeah. Oh, yeah. Well,
But
you
I am
you
the
you didn't go to the parade, did you? You said you didn't. There was a
uh
parade.
no, I didn't get to go to the parade. It was just like too much hassle to get downtown. If you
Yeah.
got downtown, you were stuck downtown for like 18 hours. So,
Jeez.
but the Super Bowl night, we all watched and I was in the if you see everybody pouring out on the broad street, I was in that.
All right. So yeah. So let's get into some questions here. We do have quite a bit. So first, can you tell us why did you choose to become a bioethicist? Well, first, what is a bioethicist to you? Let's start there because
It's a fair question.
I'm not sure I know.
So one of the things that the way I like to talk about bioethics and bioethicists is that there are people who go into med school and look at the science, the diagnostics, the ability to care for people in medicine, but there is a humanities or a social science to medicine as well. And bioethicists, that's what we do. So we're trained in everything from qualitative methodology when it comes to research, but we look at things like experientialness, consent, policy, decision making, triage, all of those things. So if you've ever been to the hospital, unfortunately or fortunately, if you've ever been to the hospital and you've experienced major decision making, most likely a bioethicist was somewhere in the background. That's a clinical bioethicist, but we're all sorts of places. Plenty of bioethicists are lawyers and they do things like my mentor was one of the people that defended the ACA in front of the Supreme Court and won. There are plenty of bioethicists that are also academics and teach in med schools and usually teach around ethics and ethical codes. Um, yeah, and then more and more of us are kind of popping up in public health and population health.
Yeah. Yeah. So why do you think you chose to become a bioethicist?
Um, So I went into undergrad very certain I was going to go to med school. I was very, very certain I was going to become a forensic entomologist, which that's the whole other thing. Until I was told that if you go to med school, you have to intern and in interning as well as residency, you have to treat people. people. And I was like, I don't want to treat people
Mhm.
because a forensic entomologist just deals with the dead and they deal with, primarily the insects related to um, that are found on corpses and on and around and near and involved in those things. And I was like, I don't want to treat people. I don't want to do that. I don't want to care for people's individualized health. And when I found that out, I was like, oh no, 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 thank you. But later on, I would fall in love with public health. Specifically, I work in and specialize in HIV and other communicable diseases like monkeypox and COVID. I love population health, but I'm very, very enamored with how people decide what they decide, how practitioners of medicine decide what they decide. And I really love policy. So that's when I found bioethics, I was like, oh, this is perfect. I can care for people in the way that I like to from the distance I prefer.
Yeah, thank you. So this is it's about misinformation and disinformation, and so we're wondering if you can share some examples of misinformation and disinformation or conspiracy theories that have been particularly challenging or widespread in public health.
Yeah. So, I really one of the some of the greatest examples, I mean, we all lived through the initial stages of COVID. But like what I how I like to describe this is misinformation happens all the time in medicine. It's just when someone doesn't understand the science of medicine. Medicine's complex. Most medical information is written at a 12th grade or higher literacy level, so it's not universally literate for people. And so it's very easy for people to sort of fill in the blanks accidentally the wrong way when you add in things like aging, cognition, education, language barriers. There's all sorts of things that can affect misinformation and cause people to create it. It's by and large, it can be pretty morally benign. It's not poorly intended, but it can have poor consequence. Um, and so, like a good example was there's a really great one I saw, and I wish I had like grabbed the tweet was that somebody had told their doctor that they had roaches on their liver, right?
Okay, yeah.
And that they and their doctor was like, I don't know what you mean by that. And the person was very, very adamant. They're like, I have roaches on my last doctor said I have roaches on my liver, and that's why I take um like Barbie something, right? And the doctor was just baffled, could not understand what this man was talking about. And when they finally were able to get a hold of his medical records and then also do a full assessment of him, it turns out that he had cirrhosis of the liver
Okay.
and he was taking barbiturates. And so, in that instance, he had told a lot of people in his life that he had a problem with roaches in his liver. That's a like a very kind of silly, goofy example, but that happens all the time of
Yeah.
like where people just have the wrong idea. A more believable or like pretty widespread one is around HIV. And we talk all the time about HIV being spread through bodily fluids. But that was a little too general when we came up with that statement. And so it means that a lot of people started to believe that you could get HIV from saliva, which is not true. And so that is one of those instances where that just gets proliferated. It's misinformation. It's a misunderstanding of what we mean by bodily fluids. People in medicine understand what we mean by bodily fluids, or people who work in the health sciences. And then
Yeah.
disinformation is intentional. So disinformation is
Right.
telling people something with the intent to mislead them, and there's usually a monetary gain to it.
Okay. Can you think of an example of that? That seems kind of messed up.
Yeah, like I mean, there's a lot of disinformation that happens around, particularly targeting Black and Brown people in medicine and health, and so things like Black people have thicker skin, or that Black people need have higher like creatinine levels. There's Black women have their biology is different, so that's why they have shorter gestational cycles. All of these things are not correct. They're all wrong. And they lead to major health failures, but they are constantly proliferated in either medicine or with disinformation creators and bad actors. Recently, we saw RFK Jr. make a statement about how Black people have different biology and don't need as many vaccines. It's very, very
Yeah.
dangerous. Um, And for him, historically, he has existed as someone who has benefited financially pretty greatly from his the organization that was started, and he's helmed for the past like 20 years, I think it's been. So
Yeah.
the disinformation is very, very profitable. It's because it's easy to create, it's free to create. And if you can build up enough of a following on social media, but also just in the general public, there's all sorts of ways that you can monetize disinformation.
Yeah, I'm wondering if like because you said medical information is usually written at 12th grade or
Mhm,
above.
mhm.
Are there resources for people who don't like read at that level to understand their condition or like
I mean, there's all sorts of organizations who have taken up the mantle of either educating people who work in medicine, public health and medicine, about the issue of health literacy. But also, there's plenty of places that just address literacy outright. And they try to create things at a more universal literacy level. But there's not like a central requisite when it comes to getting medical information. So, for example, when you go and pick up your prescriptions, most of your prescriptions most likely are written at a 12th grade reading level.
yeah.
That's what they're written at. And they're written in a way that is presumptively amorphic. And so, what I mean by that is, with a very dramatic language, is that the instructions are written in a way that assumes that there are certain words you understand the interpretation of. So when it says something like, when your prescription bottle says, like, take 2 doses a day, the prescription bottle is assuming you understand what a dose is.
Hmm.
Because a dose can be 3 pills, it can be 1 pill, it can be a pill in tandem with a liquid. It like, what is a dose?
Yeah.
There's a lot of sweeping assumption with that.
All right. Thank you for that. So moving on, let's move on to another thing. What are some of the key ethical dilemmas that you think arise when combating misinformation, especially when it affects vulnerable populations?
The biggest ethical dilemmas are, I think, that happen for a lot of people is understanding that people I see all the time, at least on social media and in real life, I can see people be willing to sort of be dismissive and write people off or communities off as stupid,
Hmm.
which I think is really problematic, or as bad. We oftentimes, in a lot of ways, when people are behaving or making choices that are antithetical to their health, we want to label those people in a dichotomous way. So we want to say that they're either bad or good. And we frequently say that they're bad when they're making bad choices or they're making bad choices. But when it comes to health, the hard thing to understand is that most people think they're making a good choice for themselves and their health based on the information they have. Now, if the information that they have is inaccurate or not factual or misleading, then they are not making a healthy choice, but they're not aware of that. Um, so when you're subject to a bad actor instead, um, so that's one of the ethical dilemmas, is trying to help people understand that we're not talking to people who are bad because they're not the creator of this information. And when you're talking about marginalized populations, they have really sound reason to be hesitant. Historically, I mean, there is incidences for people who've been incarcerated, pregnant women, Black and Brown people especially, have all experienced an exceptional amount of being experimented on, um, in very real ways by and fund that in ways that were funded by public health endeavors, and they were misled through the whole event. Things like the Tuskegee syphilis study was a 40-year project of misleading Black people, almost 50% of the population, a substantial portion of the population in Macon, Alabama. So, like, they're not wrong to not trust a large scale institution or entity. And they're not stupid for doing that either.
Yeah, thank you, Evan. So, going to the next question. So you're on TikTok. You're a TikToker. Given your experience there, what ethical responsibilities? Here we go, ethics again. What ethical responsibilities do influencers have when disseminating public health information? Yeah.
I really it's a good question because I vacillate back and forth. Um, I'll say this, I don't think that any one influencer has any ethical obligation to anyone. And that's the unfortunate thing about social media.
Mhm.
An influencer doesn't have any um there's no and there's also no impetus, right? The impetus is especially for people who are able to monetize, again, when money gets involved, or people who like attention, they can say basically whatever they want and they have no ethical responsibility. Now, for people who are going to be um, on TikTok and present themselves and really are, I'll make that distinction too, because there have been several instances of people being on TikTok and presenting themselves as professionals and they were not. But if you're going to be on TikTok in the way and what your content and your creator account is going to be is as informative and as an expert, then I think you have an ethical responsibility to give people the most sound information as possible. And always with the caveat that, especially with something like TikTok that is very free flowing, that you may make smaller mistakes in the information, but generally the information is correct. Because there's also the problem of perfectionism on TikTok. So also knowing what is like a mistake that doesn't have bearing on changing the information overall or the point, right? And I think a lot of people have trouble with that. Both the individuals who are creating content as well as the people consuming it. But like for me, I have a real responsibility to make I set these the standards for myself to make content that's informational and as nuanced as public health is. I do, and I also try to make very apolitical content with the awareness that public health and medicine have now become hyper politicized and polarized. So me bringing up and pointing out that RFK Jr. being a anti-vaxxer and a vaccine denialist it has political connotations because he's been appointed to be in charge of HHS, for example. Um, I don't have a political perspective um, on him specifically. I have a scientific perspective of knowing the science of vaccines, and so it's just going to put me in opposition in some
Yeah.
situations, but I don't make political content on purpose because I don't think these things are political. I think these things are what's in the best interest of the public, or I know them to be in the best interest of the public. So those are the things I think are ethical responsibilities. Do I think any one influencer owes us anything? Unfortunately not. And a
Mhm.
lot of influencers show that, especially those that are not professionals. So they have nothing, they're not risking anything by giving scary or misrepresented information. The best example I can give is like watching people talk about bird flu on TikTok who are not experts, who are not tracking disease all day, every day,
Yeah.
but are reading headlines and then pulling their own sort of decisions and their own perspectives out of it and then presenting them in content.
Yeah. So, everyone, I have seen Evan's videos, and you do have, I would say, pretty high standards for your stuff. So the link, I put the link in the chat if you guys want to check out Evan's TikTok. We did get a question from Kay. Do you have any other social media accounts sharing content similar to the one you have on TikTok, like on Instagram?
I started back when TikTok went dark for 12 minutes. Um, whatever that time was. I
Yeah.
did start a Patreon. The reason why I started the Patreon was twofold. There is a free membership side of it that's just basically me reposting a lot of my TikToks. I do plan to populate it with some interesting information that's like 10 minutes or less, like TikToks are. And then there's a paid side of it that's like a $5 subscriber fee. The reason for that $5 side is so that I know I'm only getting people who are there to have like an honest conversation about really difficult ethical issues. So, for example, one of the videos on the paid side is about when are we dead? And it's a very real concern in clinical ethics right now
Mhm.
is this idea of the determination of death
Yeah.
and the possibility of updating the policies around neurological death, the determination of neurological death. And so that is not content that can go on TikTok
Okay.
because of a lot of reasons. The way that the community guidelines are, the way that people respond sometimes to really difficult conversations around things like death. So yeah, that's the only other content I make is for that Patreon, both the free and the like nominally paid side.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, determining death, that is interesting. That's like another event right there.
Mhm.
That's
That is a whole conversation. And
yeah.
that is a 4-part video with that's like adds up to I think about 35 or 40 minutes of just talking about policy and standards and how it looks across states and across countries. It's like it's a big conversation.
All right, so let's move on to the next question. This has to do with trust in our institutions. So how does the spread of misinformation affect public trust in health institutions, and what can be done to rebuild that trust? So well, first of all, do you feel like trust is eroding in these kinds of institutions and health institutions?
Um, I don't think that I don't think trust is eroding in the way that I feel like it's oftentimes portrayed.
Hmm.
I think that trust is being overly cast across a wide variety of people in a reductionist way. And so what I mean by that is that I don't think we've stopped believing volcanologists, right? As an example. I think we've started to believe that the pundits that are placed in discussion with them are as vital an opinion as the volcanologists. And I actually think that's sort of equally as bad or a little worse. And I think that legacy media has a lot of responsibility for this. We love to blame social media. I'll be the first one to say social media is super bad at this.
Hmm.
But legacy media sort of teed up the ball for where social media has sort of run it really, really far. And sort of like, made it like take acid and really go take off. But legacy media has spent the past, 25, maybe even longer. I'm going to say actually closer to 30, yeah, closer to 30 years because CNN and Fox News appear in the legacy media circuit and sort of changed the environment in like 1994, 1995, somewhere between 94 and 96. I'm not super certain. Um, and the appearance of things like legacy media that sort of went after either rage bait or this pundit style design rather than being informative. Historically, you would have turned on the TV and you would have watched somebody give you just the facts and also interview an expert.
Oh yeah.
And then as we move into the mid 90s, especially after the dissolution of the fairness doctrine, we start to see this like idea that like news should be entertaining, or
Hmm.
information should be entertaining. And I don't disagree. We've all grew up watching,
Hmm. Yeah.
um, Steve Irwin or like these things that were informative and educational. Children love that stuff.
Oh, I
But
love
there,
Steve Irwin.
right. There's a responsible way to do it, and legacy media didn't do that. And so I think the problem we're looking at isn't that we stopped believing experts, it's that we're now comfortable believing that random dudes with a big platform and an even larger opinion on things should be in conversation with an expert as equals. And that's just not, I don't find that, I don't agree with that. I think we have to get more comfortable with being honest that not everybody should have a platform and an opinion on things that are have like a certain amount of like immutable facts to them. And when I say immutable, I mean like there's a certain amount of like consensus in science, or a consensus informational wise. Like we shouldn't be disputing like historical knowns, for
Mm,
example. You know, which we're at that place now where it's like, well,
yeah.
maybe there's a place to question, whether like what did that many people die in the Holocaust? Like there's these weird ways that these folks have sort of incepted this idea that everything is malleable and up for like dissection, and it's really not. And also that like we should also get comfortable being able to say to someone, you don't have the breadth and depth to have this conversation with me. I think there's a little bit of responsibility for us as experts too to not have taken those offers or those invitations, but
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Evan. So let's go to some questions that came in through the registration. Um, this one comes from Rachel. Rachel says, how has the current executive administration changed how you think about the role of institutions in public health? So I'm assuming they mean the the Trump administration, or is it the Musk administration? I can't remember.
depending on the day. Um, it hasn't changed my opinion. It's actually done something, at least for me, who's as someone who works in public health. I think it's a very the weird, if I had to find the thinnest of silver linings here, um, it's made people very curious to understand how the government works. I think as a kid who grew up in Philadelphia, one of the things that I take for granted all the time is that American history was a default, and American government and civics was a default education point in from a very young age because you're in Philadelphia, right? Like,
Hmm. Oh yeah.
um, our city government is older and is the base design for the American federal design. Like people don't realize or remember that Philadelphia was the capital and it was also one of the like original 13 colonies. And so that education was really formative for me, but a lot of people did not get that education. And so a lot of people don't know how their government works. They sort of, people go out, they vote for president, and they go home, and they don't have
Yeah.
a good sense of like, what's an appropriations bill? Like, what is a continuing resolution? What does that mean for who can go to work, who will get paid? Um, who gets to decide whether or not a department can be funded or built or dismantled or combined. And I think a lot of people are learning that. And I think that's really great because people should know how their government works. No matter what kind of government they're living under, you can't change or fix something or dismantle it if you don't know where all the pieces go. But I also think this is the thin silver lining of this too for me is the fact that this is an opportunity for municipal governments and for state governments to really step up, especially the municipal and state public health departments to shine through. And they're the ones really taking care of your health at the end of the day, first and foremost. A lot of what happens at the Fed level is distribution and
Hmm.
sort of management and like fact finding and gathering, um, first. There's obviously research that's done, but there's like bigger picture things that happen there. But your individual health is being taken care of by your municipal workers, people who make $65,000 a year
Yeah.
and go to work and are happy to do it. And so this is a really great time for people to explore like the breadth and depth of their municipal public health department. And I think that's an even better thing.
All right. Thank you, Evan. The next one comes in from Cindy. I think we might have touched on this one a little bit. What's the most shocking claim you've had to debunk? And then they add, I am continuously amazed at how gullible some people can be lately.
I mean, yeah, like I want to challenge the idea of someone being gullible
Hmm.
because uh one of the things that I don't know if anybody's ever had that moment where you're learning something and something sort of hits you and it doesn't just hit you in the space that you were learning it, but it also like sort of reformulates or like it does something where like it changes the chemistry of your brain. But for many years, I did Muay Thai, and one of the things that my when I got to a point where I was pretty pretty advanced at it, everybody develops a little bit of an ego when they've kind of hit that point where they're good, but they haven't yet become a true practitioner. They're still a little immature. And my original coach said that, none of us should develop, we should all have humility around our practice as we grow older and more practiced, because we more and more you should recognize that everybody has a first day.
Yeah.
And so when people talk about gullibility, I want us all to remember that we all were infants. We've all started this life without knowing how to read. Um, there's something we've all believed. Maybe we believed it as a young kid. Maybe we believed it at a time that it seems more innocent, but we've all believed something pretty goofy.
Yeah.
Um, like, my mom tricked us into thinking that the light in the car, if you turned it on, that the police would pull you over. And
Oh.
you know and she just did that because she didn't want us playing with that light, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
uh I was a kid,
That's
and these things. So I'm going to say that around the idea of gullibility. But the most shocking thing I've ever heard to my face was when I was giving a presentation about disinformation, and particularly around polygenism, which is the pseudoscience around this idea that people of different races have different biologies inherently, which is not true. You have more in common with people that you've shared geospatial space with. You're genetically more attuned to someone who's been eating the same things and exposed to the same environments than someone of the same racial background. And someone really did in that presentation say that, but no, like Black women do have a different gestational cycle because they have different biology. Like they believed it. Like they believed it. They weren't trying to be a jerk. They weren't trying to be like, when we talk about the idea of like racist, they weren't trying to be like cruelly they really were shell shocked at the fact that that was wrong. And it's like I was like, no, no, no.
yeah.
And that was very, very hard for them to like grasp. It
Yeah.
was very that I've never seen that in the wild. I
Yeah.
had read it in all of my studies, but like I had never seen somebody actually in a public health space that I'm training like believe, like know that, you know misinformation or disinformation point and believe it. That was like wild.
Yeah, it seems like kind of old information like that was would be spread or like I don't know, like 100 years ago or something like that in the 19th century or something like that. Doesn't seem
Mm-hmm.
like it would be in today's age, but there it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, all right, let's go to I think we got some questions here in the chat. Andrew's asking, are there specific oh, sorry, are there specific organizations that help translate medical information into plain language that libraries or other organizations can partner with to bring health literacy to the public? I think we touched on this one already. Um,
I don't know about organizations. There's a tool that I really like that I encourage people to use if you're making front-facing resources. It is an AI tool, and I always tell people to be very careful with open source AI tools. So don't feed it anything you wouldn't that has confidentiality to it or is important information that could be misleading or could be destructive inherently. But the Hemingway app is one of my favorite apps because you can copy and paste text right into it, and it will break down and tell you about what the reading comprehension level is of the text that you placed in it. It'll point out where you can lower comprehension level, and so like what's causing the issue, like multisyllabic words or compound sentence structures. And you can edit in real time inside the app, and it will adjust its reading of your reading comprehend of the comprehension levels. And so it's been very, very useful for me because I frequently like to make materials that um, average about fifth grade reading
Hmm.
standards, so
Okay.
that it's mostly consumable for most people.
Okay. Um, we got another question from Kimberly. Did you happen to see the recent New York Times article about misinformation about ADHD on TikTok? If so, any insights or comments? Did you catch that article?
I saw the article. I didn't get a chance to read it, but I do know touch wise that there's a lot of I'm going to use the term pseudoscience around neurodivergence and neurodivergent um, like symptoms, and even further, it expands into like a whole wing of TikTok that is like mental health. It's very misleading about mental health and can lead to people sort of overusing or over diagnosing things like narcissism. That's what I can say about that. But I haven't gotten to read the article, unfortunately. I
Okay.
have it like saved in my Apple News.
Okay. Um, let's see. Let's go to another one here. I think there was one that was related to ADHD from the registers. Um, okay, maybe I'll find it later, but let's go to the chat here. Okay, so let's see. Aaron, oh, wrote quite a bit. I was on a public health collaborative webinar earlier today, and Caitlin Jaitlina, probably saying that wrong,
Mhm.
sorry, was a keynote speaker discussing some of the implications of mis and disinformation on public health. She discussed moving away from terms like misinformation or fake news to avoid triggering conversation, especially surrounding building community partnerships. This has
Mhm.
become a more common talking point, especially among equity officers. The need to avoid terms like equity, diversity, inclusion, disparity, misinformation, etc., are really being redirected into different terminology, a rebranding of sorts. Have you had to do this, or have you started implementing it within your own work? If so, has it worked for you? Do you have favored terms?
Um, I will say that I I have pushback for that, and I have embrace for it, and I understand. Uh, because I know PHCCs work really well, and I was one of their ambassadors last year towards the end of the year. Um, I I don't personally. This is a personal opinion. I don't agree with moving away from using terminology like misinformation and disinformation. And the reason why I don't is because there is a science to it, and so it's not as simple as like, oh, this language is just like terminology or neologisms. Oh, I'm gonna get that. Um, there is a science to it. The science starts with this idea of infodemiology. I mean, there's a suggestion from Dr. Fauci a couple years ago, where we should start to build out like with structural basis around health misinformation because it does operate in a design. It's very and it's predictable in that way, and it's executable in that way, and it's traceable, especially with technology and platforms and places. It spreads. It's why we use language similar or parallel to disease language, because it does operate, and we know how to track and care for and address disease. And so the same thing. And so when you change the language of something that does have a science to it, you run the risk of sort of mucking with the science of it, and being a bit confusing. So I'll say that about misinformation and disinformation. I'm very attached to using the language that we've formulated distinctively with definitions. Um, to the other effect of health equity language, have I shifted my language? my answer is like yes and no. I've become more descriptive. I found that instead of using filler like terminology, I just have to write things all the way out, right?
Yeah.
But I limit that behavior to what I'm doing that interfaces with um, sort of libertine actors. I think now more than ever, and again, this might teeter on the edge of like sort of political perspective and opinion, political being just like a general like um, conceptualization. I think now more than ever, we have to use the most inclusive language possible, if for no other reason than so people can identify the safest places to access the things that they need to access. If I stop using the language of gender expansiveness and gender inclusivity, then I run the risk of trans people not knowing that they can still get their health care or get their resourcing or their support services from me, and I don't
Right.
want to do that.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but if I need to, report to a grant maker that has shown that they've started to become divisive around gender language, then sure, I don't care. Like if that's going to make them more comfortable
Hmm.
and not disrupt my ability to access money for the services I need to in order to perform the care that I need to perform. Public health will outlast these trending hatreds. And so it's important for me in that time as hatreds trend and flame out as they want to do, that I don't follow try to hide myself in so much that I leave people neglected or unable to find the care that they need, or it disrupts them. Um, it's very easy for people's health to turn on a dime when resourcing evaporates or becomes hidden.
Yeah, for sure. So on that kind of same vein about terms, somebody's asking, Lisa is asking, why do we use the word disinformation instead of just calling it what it is, lies? I can understand misinformation when it's truly a misunderstanding. So why don't we just call it lies and instead?
Um, it's because lies is too broad. I mean,
Yeah.
there's white lies, there's people who lie. It's more about motivation and understanding motivation. Lying, and also to understand lying is an interpersonal activity. Lying is a moral term. It's moralized language. So
Okay.
and what I mean by that is that morals are individualized, right? So I can lie to you, I can lie to my friend, I can lie to my family, but disinformation is something that can exist and also sort of move without necessarily a singular individual constantly uh, pushing it along. A single individual can be a conjurer of it, but again, it spreads in a way where at some point it exists as its own entity and thing. I don't know if that makes sense. Like it kind of lives everywhere and nowhere, especially again in the sphere of technology and online where things are eternal. Um, you'll be combating disinformation for the rest of who knows however long, wherever it's hidden online. Yeah, lying is a there's better philosophers than me. I mostly like to research discuss, but lying is a moral action and it has a bigger implication. And there's lots of modern and classic philosophers that love to unpack the concept of lying. So I think that's why that's my educated guess why those things are not overlapped in that way.
Okay, thank you, Evan. This next question comes from Emily. Emily asks, how can scientists debunk misinformation and disinformation without having people feel like we are talking down to them? Hmm.
Very, very difficult. It's doing the thing that's very, very hard. It's very, very hard online. I do not know. contextualize this by saying I'm not quite sure I know how to do this interpersonally online. But it really is about building relationships. First of all, it's about the concept of pre-bunking. For a long time, the science community has sort of been very comfortable being like, we're the experts.
Hmm.
You need to respect that. And what we put out is the information. And if you don't understand the information we put out, that's not for you to understand then. It's been a little, there's a lot of elitism in science. And I mean, I've experienced it a lot looking the way that, which is why I intentionally look the way I do. I won't give up looking the way that I do, no matter how deep into the science community and science space that I end up. But it also leads to a lot of condescension, and I do it on purpose. I bait it on purpose because with looking younger and not wearing a suit or whatever it is that activates it, because elitism is the problem. And I think we made things, there's plenty of things that are very consumable in science, but we don't use the language of consumability. We use very fancy language, or we don't think people are worth explaining the fancy language to when we
Mm,
do have to use it. And
yeah.
people are worth explaining it. When I was you get a bioethics degree, at least I did in a med school. I would come home and my mom, who was, a little 68, 67-year-old woman at the time, she just loves knowing what I'm up to. And she asked me how my day was and what I learn. I could talk down to her as someone who doesn't have all the education I have and doesn't understand all the things that I do, but why? And now my mother's better off for it. She knows a lot of bioethics for no reason because we would sit over dinner and chit chat. But it's because I immediately would take what I learned in class and all of this like really didactic reading that I would do, and I would like distill it in a way that I could have a conversation with my mom. So building interpersonal relationships, creating materials, even if it's just like when you put out a report, you put out a really brilliant, you've done really great research, you put out a brilliant report and you publish it. I'm not telling you to stop publishing it, but maybe consider then taking that published report and seeing if you can make a community friendly version to
Yeah.
just let people have. People are curious about science and they don't have access to all the like AJPH or like all the different the Lancet and Nature and all of these publishing houses, but we can give them an all access easy to read version. They might be interested in what you're learning about.
Thank you, Evan. Next one. Uh, this one comes from, oh, I'm gonna get this name wrong. Thais. Thais. When should you engage with someone who insists that their view is correct, and when should you leave? Identify bad faith argument.
um
Someone who is correct.
when they're
Okay.
correct.
So
it,
they're insisting that they're right. Um,
mhm.
should you engage with them?
You don't
To
have to teach everybody. I'll
Yeah,
say this.
okay,
We
okay.
like I don't feel that way. I have said to people in the comments, you feel very committed to you feel committed to the argument, not to learning.
Mm,
And that's it. Like and it's is it dismissive? Sure, but so is trying to bait me in a rage centered or rage fueled way into having a discussion that would just really tire me out and create. I don't want to start to have arguments with people because when you talk to people who are committed to the argument, not to learning, what you end up doing is you can build resentment, or you can start to build judgmentalness, or you can start to build like a really negative perspective of people who are asking you questions in good faith, right?
yeah.
It happens a lot for creators, especially on TikTok. I mean, every time I open my TikTok, there's like 35 comments, and some of them are people being sort of birds, and then there's also people who really want to know something and they're not trying to be a bird about it. But like, if I entertain everybody equally, then at some point I start to become dismissive and cruel to everyone. And so really you have to sort of recognize when someone is interested in learning from you, and being in an honest conversation, and when someone is looking to sort of have a gotcha moment or is really disinterested in arguing. There's a lot of people who are interested in arguing. That doesn't, I
Yeah.
always like to tell people it seems like you're committed, or, when I notice that, I like to also tell people like you seem very invested in being upset. I hope you heal.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah, I mean,
you know
I think about like what do you think like what we learn in school is do you think they push for like winning an argument, like how to win an argument or make a good argument?
in schools.
Is yeah, like even into college and
No, I mean, we're in discussion. I mean,
mm,
there's a difference between discussing something and arguing. And I don't ever want to be in an argument. I am getting too old to have the energy to argue. I mean, I just want to lay it down after that.
yeah,
But I love discussing things. I was hanging out with, two other bioethicists last night, in discussion. And we had um, very radical opinions of what the subject matter, and we were not on originally on the same um, plane in
yeah,
terms of our perspectives. But at no point, I wasn't discussing with them being like, I'm gonna get you. I was discussing
yeah,
with them because I really want to understand what they were what point they were trying to make. I was like, I don't know if I see it that way, but like, can you explain further? Can you tell me more? Well, here's where I'm like seeing a hole in that concept or that theory. Can you fill that in for me? Or like, what would be the answer in these conditions? Like, that's a discussion. That's
yeah,
fine. Pushback is okay. Like, you want to things to be tried and true and tested, but somebody who's just it's not a game, like
right, right,
intellectualism isn't someone's gonna win. Intellectualism is like you both walk away feeling a little changed and a little more learned, or just sort of like, that's not where I would have taken that, and that's interesting that that's what you got out of that reading or you got out of that idea, and like that's fascinating too. Even if I don't buy into it, I can be fascinated by it. A lot of people don't realize, I think, people who want to be seen as intellectual, but struggle with intellectualism, um, see from the outside two people who are disagreeing in a discussion and think, oh man, I want to be the winner in that. And I don't ever go into that thinking that. And a lot of people don't.
so for you like the discussion, the purpose is just to like grow or like to find some sort of truth
It's to
or
grow.
is it just entertaining or like
It can be.
yeah.
Like, for example, and a lot of people think this is like a waste of their time. One of the questions I asked, one of the philosophical questions I've asked on my TikTok, on like a private setting to like my mutuals was, is Barney experiencing a carceral state?
Mm,
Make your argument, right?
yeah.
And I set up the question of like, is he like a non-human, but he has parity and parallel consciousness and value? And if so, is he experiencing something carceral because he can't leave the school and he can only be conjured by children? Or is he an animal that's become sentient, and is he subject to the like ethics and the conceptualizations that we have towards animals? Make your argument.
Yeah.
There's no right answer. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But I want to see what people's minds do, and I want to see how people sort of stretch around or explain, or yeah, it's
It's
exercise.
an exercise. Yeah, it
It's
sounds like an
exercise.
exercise. Yeah.
It's not to be right, it's not to win, it's an exercise. And people had a really good time with it, and they were like, man, like that was so, I would have never asked that question. And I'm like, well, that's why you ask these questions in ethics, is to stretch your sort of imagination and your innovation around these ideas. We're not arguing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I wonder what happened to Barney. Did he die or what happened?
Even more to the point, can he die? That's a new question. I'll deal with that later.
All right. All right. Let's see. We have time for we got about 3 more minutes left, but I think we could get another one, maybe two. I don't know. This one's from Karina. Have you partnered with public libraries in the past to combat health disinformation. So, what kinds of initiatives did you collaborate on? So, have you worked with
Um,
libraries before?
I have. I did. I had been asked because the National Library of Medicine, that's split across several um,
Regions?
campuses and colleges,
Mm.
had asked me a year and a half ago if I would do a video because they have like an archive of like educational videos that they collect around all sorts of topics. And they'd asked me to do one. And unfortunately, it just didn't work out. It fell through because I had to have like pretty major surgery and I was like down and out for like 2 weeks. And then when I circled back with them, the person who had originally arranged it, the funding had changed or something had changed for the project. And so they were unable to do it. So I have almost in the past. I love a good library. I am a library kid, so for sure I would do it in a heartbeat. Yeah.
Do you remember your first library experience?
Oh yeah. The
Yeah.
Philadelphia Public Library is the first library system in the nation, and we have one of the biggest and most grand libraries. I
Oh, wow.
think. I
Yeah.
mean, like New York has a bigger one. Like, I know people got bigger ones now, but the one we have, our main branch on the Parkway, is. I just remember walking in the first time, and I thought I was going to pass out. I was so overwhelmed with how stunning it was.
Yeah.
And it made me think of like how I wanted it to be my home. It was so lovely. I was like, I
Yeah.
can't live here. Like that's crazy.
It's the OG, right? Isn't that
Yeah.
did Ben Franklin start that or something?
Mm-hmm. And there's an even older one here, or even older library system here that predates it back to almost the 1700s, is the one started by Germantown Friends School, which is a public library as well. It's a private library system open to the public.
Nice.
Mhm.
Cool. Well, Evan, I think that's gonna be it for us. It's 6 o'clock. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and special thanks to Evan for joining us. This was really, really awesome. Evan, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me, everyone. I hope we got enough of the questions.
Yeah, we got quite a bit. All right, everybody. Thank you and good night.